Welcome, everybody. And our beloved Dean Kate Moorehead is here to talk to us about a very unusual book called The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And I'm sure that you will be blessed by her time with us, but also blessed by the story and what Cormac McCarthy was all about in writing this book. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you for having me. And I know some of you probably have read this book and some of you have not. Is that correct? Most people have. If you've read the book, would you raise your hand so I can see? Okay, we do have a few. This is a book that is very, very beautiful, but very, very dark. And so a lot of what we're going to talk about today has to do with exploring the darkness. And it's a very important message for us right now. Celeste Tisdale chose this book. And as many of you know, Celeste is a priest who is struggling with lymphoma. And she is remarkably heroic in her battle. It's recurred now twice in her life. Her husband also has Lewy body dementia. And so she's battling a lot of darkness. And yet this is a story about how the light shines in the darkness. And when we're talking about this class, I want you to remember that one verse from the Gospel of John, the first chapter, how it says, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness shall not overcome it." So we're going to talk about why the darkness illuminates beauty so much, and why in our lives right now, I'd like us to both look at this book, but also look at the book of Job, because this is a modern day version in many ways of the book of Job. And then also think about what's happening to us right now, because we are in a period of darkness, and yet there are ways in which the light is shining even brighter because of the fact that we're going through this very difficult time as a world with the virus. So I think this book has so many reverberations in our lives, and it will be very rich to talk about with you. I'm glad to see we just have a manageable crowd today, so I would like to begin with a couple of questions. If you would unmute yourselves, we can just talk for a moment. Let me see if this will play. Imagine if your worst fears were to come true. So what does darkness look like to you? What would be your worst case scenario? This is difficult to talk about, but what would be the worst case scenario for the future of the world? What do you think, you guys? Just speak out. What would be the worst things that could happen to us? We don't want to think about it, but let's go there for a minute. What is a fear? Yeah.
No, major recessions, depression, back to the 1930s.
Yes, so the pandemic results in a major depression economically. What else could happen? Bad stuff. It's okay, we can talk about the darkness. It's better to do it, actually. What else are we afraid of?
Loss of family and friends.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah.
let's say the virus starts to get even more aggressive and we lose our own loved ones to it. That's a great example, Jay. Thank you. What else are we afraid of? I know I'm afraid that it will never end. I know intellectually that the pandemic will end, all plagues end, but I think I have a fear that it won't end. We'll never get back together at the cathedral. It'll always be virtual. That's a fear. What other worst case scenarios for the world do we fear in the back of our minds?
Well, I think of places like Africa, where we haven't seen the worst by a long shot yet, and other places where the death tolls are just mounting like crazy, and it's just hard to imagine.
So the virus, we can imagine, could spread a lot worse. We could also have our worst hateful selves go to war with each other, whether it's civil war here or war with other countries that are our sort of violent, hateful cells could go to war. I mean, I know since I was a child, we've always been afraid of nuclear war. That's been an apocalyptic worst case scenario. We blow each other up, basically, or we trash the environment so badly that we can't live well anymore. These are all terrible notions, but it's good to explore them and look at them rather than push them aside. So let's say that all these bad things happen in the road. We're not exactly sure what happened, but a child is born into the midst of total destruction of the earth. A child is born, and right as this child is being born, a little boy, something happens and we don't even know what it was, but the child is born into devastation. On the day his wife would give birth to his only son, the clocks stop and the world as they had known it came to an end, leaving them in a barren landscape, growing increasingly cold and dark. Ash is everywhere. There is a blackness that is so impenetrable, the narrator insists that it would, quote, hurt your ears with listening. They walk in a cold, autistic dark. Isn't that incredible? This writer is so poignant. Where the only voices with any human feeling are their own voices, the limited conversation between father and son. The narrator's tone, especially when clearly aligned with the man's, is as metaphysical as that of Job. On this road, he thinks, there are no God-spoke men. They are gone, and I am left, and they have taken with them the world. Query, how does the never to be differ from what never was? Another passage, ambiguous as to whether it is the narrator or the man's perspective, reads, perhaps in the world's destruction, it would be possible at last to see how it was made. Oceans, mountains, the ponderous counter-spectacle of things ceasing to be, the sweeping waste, hydroptic and coldly secular, the silence. The man and his son have long been abandoned by the suicide of their wife and mother. So the mother gives birth and then can't handle being the mother to this child in the midst of the devastation, so she kills herself. A woman whose only answer, like that of Job's wife, had been to curse God and die. Their isolation is near total. To read their story is to follow a small flickering flame moving slowly in a field of utter darkness. This is the interpretation of Christina Bieber Lake. Isn't that incredible? So this book is about a flame, a flickering flame, the love of a father and son, as they move slowly in a field of utter darkness. Remember, we're thinking about that verse in the Gospel of John. Say it with me. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness shall not overcome it, right? It feels like the darkness is going to overcome it, doesn't it? This is really devastating stuff. And yet, in the midst of this incredible dark world where there's very little hope, I mean, we're going to see cannibalism, violence, destruction, darkness, and yet there's this beautiful love between a father and a son, which is like a flickering flame. In fact, the boy says, we're carrying a flame. He says that to the dad, we're carrying a flame. So to this father, from his perspective, he's very much like Job. He has a good life and a lovely wife, and they're going to have a child, and then everything falls apart for him. So I want to read to you this passage from the book of Job, because it echoes the feelings of the father. Let the day perish in which I was born, and the night that said, a man-child is conceived, and let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, or light shine on it. Let gloom and deep darkness claim it. Let clouds settle upon it. Let the blackness of the day terrify it. That night, let thick darkness seize it. Let it not rejoice among the days of the year. Let it not come into the number of the months. Yes, let that night be barren. Let no joyful cry be heard in it. Let those curse it who curse the sea. those who are skilled to rouse up Leviathan. Let the stars of its dawn be dark. Let it hope for light, but have none. May it not see the eyelids of the morning, because it did not shut the doors of my mother's womb and hide trouble from my eyes. This is a poem of great despair. And the father is in that. He is in the midst of total despair, partly because he knows what he once had. He knows that the world was once good, and he grieves its loss, whereas the son, who was born into the darkness, does not share the same sense of loss as the father. But the father is kept alive by his love for the son. At the beginning of the book, the father reaches out in the darkness just to feel that his boy is there next to him. And the boy says, "Hi, Papa," he said. "I'm right here." And the dad says, "I know." So in the midst of that darkness, do you see this incredible beauty? These stark conversations, but have nothing but pure love and presence. What is the word for God again, right? I am here. I'm right here. There's this vision of God being in the midst of the relationship between the Father and the Son. In the midst of total darkness, there's still this love, this pure and amazing love, without any complications to it. Here is the man realizing that the world seems to be almost the opposite of creating and expanding. It's as if the world is shrinking. He tried to think of something to say to his son, but could not. He'd had this feeling before, beyond the numbness and the dull despair, the world shrinking down about a raw core of parsable entities, the names of things slowly following those things into oblivion, colors, the names of birds. So he feels like he's losing not only the things that he loved, but he's even forgetting their names. Remember how Adam names the creation as it comes into being? He feels as if not only is the creation crumbling, but his vocabulary is decreasing. His ability to name it is decreasing. The names of birds, things to eat. Finally, the names of things one believed to be true, more fragile than he would have thought. How much was gone already? The sacred idiom shorn of its reference and so of its reality, drawing down like something trying to preserve heat in time to wink out forever. And in the midst of all this uncreation, there's this love. He turned and looked at the boy. Maybe he understood for the first time that to the boy, he was himself an alien, a being from a planet that no longer existed, the tales of which were suspect. He could not construct for the child's pleasure the world he'd lost without constructing the loss as well. And he thought perhaps the child had known this better than he. So he doesn't even want to talk about the prior world because he realizes it'll only hurt his son. So he finds it hard to talk to him. He preserves him and protects him in a way by not conveying his loss. So as the book proceeds, the father and son walk around the land and they encounter some really difficult stuff. Human beings eating each other, terrible violence. The father protects the son. They find food here and there, but they are struggling through this massive devastation. And the father becomes sick. He starts coughing, and he sort of coughs. It's beautifully done. He coughs a little bit and more throughout the book, and he tries to hide it from the son. But the son knows what's happening. He knows that his dad is sick. And towards the end, the father begins to pray for the first time, but it's prayers of Job. It's prayers of despair. It says he descended into a grike in the stone. I'm not sure what a grike is. Owen, do you know what a grike is? No? Does anybody know what a grike is? Maybe it's like a niche or something in the stone. And there he crouched, coughing, and he coughed for a long time. He starts coughing up blood. Then he just knelt in the ashes. He raised his face to the paling day. "Are you there?" he whispered. "Will I see you at the last? Have you a neck by which to throttle you? Have you a heart? Damn you eternally, have you a soul?" "Oh God," he whispered. "Oh God." This is ultimate prayer, isn't it? When we're really mad at God, and God can handle it. It's good to be mad at God. And it's the first time he really prays, but it's nothing but anger. But also hope that he might see God so he can wring God's neck, right? The father finally dies and leaves the son, and there's this moment when all we have is the son, and how is he going to survive? And in that moment of greatest despair is when the son finds human beings who care for him, and particularly a mother figure. For the first time, the son talks to the mother about God, and the only way he can relate to God is through his father, because that's how he's known love. The woman, when she saw him, the boy, put her arms around him and held him. "Oh," she said, "I am so glad to see you." She would talk to him sometimes about God. He tried to talk to God, but the best thing was to talk to his father. And he did talk to him, and he didn't forget. The woman said that that was all right. She said that the breath of God was his breath, yet though it passed from man to man through all of time. Wow, let's read that again. She said that the breath of God was his breath, yet though it passed from man to man through all of time. This is the final sentence of the book, and then I'll let us talk because there's a lot here to chew on. Once there were brook trout in the streams in the mountains. You could see them standing in the amber current where the white edges of their fins wimpled softly in the flow. They smelled of moss in your hand, polished and muscular and torsional. On their backs were vermiculate patterns that were maps of the world and its becoming, maps and mazes of a thing which could not be put back, not be made right again. In the deep glens where they lived, all things were older than man, and they hummed of mystery. So even in the midst of all this despair, from God's perspective, there's this great mystery, this humming of mystery. And on the backs of the fish are the maps of the world. It's so poetic, isn't it? This is a book of almost poetry. Its prose is so lyrical and so beautiful. And there's this sense that as hard as things are, we just don't understand, which is at the end how the book of Job resolves. God says, basically, sorry, but you don't get it. You just can't understand. And it leaves us dissatisfied, the book of Job. But it is what it is.
When I read some of these things in this book, I couldn't help getting Calvin out of my mind, and how it's possible to see the worst and to be obsessed by the worst, and it's like Dante never getting out of hell. It's and that's something that we can do, and sometimes our life overcomes us to the point that we can't get out of this, and then it's some little simple thing like brook trout that maybe help us see beyond that. And I've got my book of George Herbert here, and George would have liked this because he having tuberculosis and knowing he's going to die, still in the midst of all of that went forward, and I think the boy is going forward.
Yes, the boy is going forward. So, and tell us, others of you, how does this book make you feel, and how does it resonate with you? I love what Jay said about George Herbert. That's a great analogy of someone who found hope in the midst of the darkness. It's heavy, I know.
I like the final paragraph because I feel as if all of us have these tattoos of mazes and labyrinths on our own bodies, our own journeys,
wow.
and we hold inside ourselves a great mystery, but our journeys have not been easy for most of us.
And they do shape us, and they're part of our very being. You're right, Linda. I've never thought of that as a tattoo upon us. That's a beautiful idea. What an interesting thought. That would resonate with our younger generations. Really beautiful. What about the love of this father and son? How does it resonate with you? Have you all ever had moments where you were able to love someone like that, where you felt like God was there?
Mm.
Well, for me, to get back to your first question, I'll answer both, but what I enjoyed about it was just giving me a true gratefulness for what we have.
Mm.
I, for a while, enjoyed the series, although it was too violent, I couldn't complete it, but the series Walking Dead, because that's what I liked about it, is just to see, oh my gosh, what we know as civilization and our world could change. And I really liked thinking about that looking around and the things that we so take for granted. When I first started watching that series, that's what I liked. I would look around and just think, wow, we have cars, we have police, we have structure, we have stores where we can go to for food. That's awesome. And I never, of course, thought about that.
Yeah.
But now, today, I've thought about the Walking Dead scenario a lot, just in that so much of our structure has either gone away or we can't access it the same way or changed. And I really enjoyed this book because it was that same premise without as much violence as that particular show had. But also at the same time, showing the beauty in the hard times. And for me, although this is certainly a hard time, but not as hard as for others, because I'm not at a loss of job or had loss of family or friends, but still a loss of the world. But I brought my dad home from assisted living since March. That's him coughing across the table. And it's been a really beautiful time that I would not have had. I burnt out caring for him a couple of years, or a year or so ago. I mean, just had to have a break, put him in assisted living, which I thought would be a permanent step. And now he's back home. And although there's sometimes sometimes it's challenging, but for the most part, it's just a beautiful, wonderful time that I'm so thankful for, that I feel like this virus gave me that time.
That's beautiful.
And just a beautiful time. So I too, with you, feel like, wow, I feel in my mind, my head knows differently, but kind of in my heart, I feel like this is going to be forever. But I'm just soaking in the time and enjoying it. In some ways, really thankful that all my other distractions are pulled away, so I could just enjoy this time. So the book I thought was really lovely in showing, the loss of so much we have, to me, showed so much we take for granted. And then even amidst the really hard times, there's beauty and love, and the same things that we have, the important things we still have, that love for each other.
Mm-hmm. They say when you're afraid of something, the best thing to do is look at it. Like if you're afraid of failure, you should fail. If you're, this is a book about the worst, and yet there's still light in it. So it's hard to read, but in a way, I think it's very good for us to think about looking into our fears and into the darkness and realizing that God is still there. Other thoughts, other responses to the book, or just to the slides if you haven't had a chance to read the book.
My thoughts
Well,
are we have so much darkness now. It's like it's so hard to figure out which way we're going and how we, in ourselves, how are we going to get to it one by one or a group together? Because you don't know other people's thoughts about it, and you have to try to figure that out.
Mhm. Yeah, it is hard to figure out. Really, it is. Yeah. Owen, what were you going to say?
I hear in that last line of the book, the light, in the line, the humming of mystery.
Isn't that beautiful?
So beautiful. And it reminds me of a poem by Thomas Hardy called The Darkling Thrush, which he wrote the night that the turn of the 18th century to the 19th to the 20th, and the beginning of the 20th century. And already there was forecasts for the wars and all that the 20th century would hold. And he talks about a thrush that he sees on a frozen gate and how dark and painful the whole scene is. But then he says that the thrush has in it a glimmer of light and sound, in its sound, that though he, the poet, does not have it, he knows it is there. And that line of the humming of mystery says the same thing to me. And that is where the light that cannot be put out by the darkness is stated most beautifully, I think, at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. As much as the darkness may feel overwhelming to us, I love that humming of mystery. The whole earth, this Gaia and the whole universe is so much larger than we are that we don't have to ever worry that the humming of mystery will ever cease. We can take refuge in that. Yeah.
Well, it sort of gave me a sense of wonder, if I might use that word, and mixed thoughts and feelings all jumbled up with fear and wonder and hope and light. And it almost took my breath away, reading it and listening to you read it, Kate. And that sense of wonder is such an opposite feeling or thought from fear. And the opposites, the conflicting emotions that you get from this, are a blessing in a lot of ways, because it helps you know who you are with God and become closer as a human being and recognize how you can interact with the universe and nature and the evil and the good and all things wrapped up together.
It's very true. Go ahead, Jay.
I had a student once who was a sophomore in college and was so overcome by darkness that I was afraid he was going to commit suicide, because everything was bad and the future was bad. And it was hard to comprehend how he couldn't bring himself to see the trout swimming in the stream and he eventually came out of it. But I mean, you felt so helpless because you could just see this person completely overcome and finished. And thank heavens he didn't commit suicide. But I was very afraid that was what was going to happen.
Well, and I think that at this time we see a great deal of depression, a great deal of addiction. A lot of people who are struggling as addicts have
Right.
fallen down again. There's suicide hotlines, or so holding on to that trout
Yeah.
is really important. And as Christians, being people who are not afraid to look into the darkness with someone who's suffering can make all the difference in the world. I mean, Jay, if you were there for that guy, that might have made a difference and gotten him through it. And there is an end. I love how at the end of the book, the boy is found. The boy is found and he is given a life. It is not a story of total destruction and despair. It's a story of the protection of innocence in the midst of the darkness. And then the resurrection of that innocence into new love afterwards. So the dad, as much as he despairs, he's able to protect his son from his own despair and grief. And he's also protects his son physically, gets his son as far as he can. And that's all we're called to do too. Protect our children, protect beauty, protect goodness, and trust that we'll hand the baton off. And this is not the end of the story. The story ends very well and in a beautiful way. What else can we do to protect innocence right now in the midst of this pandemic? How can we be bearers of hope right now?
Kate, I think, well, first of all, the thinking about the story right now just reminds me of that wonderful book and movie. What was it? A Beautiful Life? Was that the name of it? About the father that protects his son in
Nazi Germany.
camp.
Yes,
Yeah.
wasn't that amazing?
Yes.
That
And
was
wouldn't it be
gorgeous.
interesting to compare those two, to read together?
Have you all seen that movie?
Yeah, it was,
Yes.
yeah, it was great.
Some folks are not nodding, but anyway, it's the story of a man who's actually in the midst of a concentration camp and yet he's able to hide his son and pretend that it's a game, and the boy is preserved, his innocence is preserved. It's the most beautiful thing, just gorgeous. And the father does sacrifice himself for the son at the end, and the mother is able to find him, and it is beautiful. Yeah. So how could we be bearers of hope in the midst of this time? What are things that we can do?
Well, we can listen. We can pray. We can listen. We can be genuine and vulnerable to those that are in need and share our stories.
Mm-hmm. Those are all wonderful things.
Also, Kate, as you've said so many times through all of this, we can be in community, in small group, and form relationships.
Yes.
And I'm watching that happen everywhere.
Good. Keep on. You guys can actually, if you're not in a group, get in one. But if you are in one, you can still form other ones. Get people together, have them share their lives together, and then say to them, wouldn't you like to do this weekly during the pandemic? Literally, be conductors. We have to have people find each other. They are so isolated right now. That's the most essential thing we can do, is get people to pray and talk weekly via Zoom. I think that's huge. If you're not doing it, get in one. I'm trying to form them as fast as I can, because that is exactly a huge source of comfort. Just to say, I feel like crap today. I need somebody to pray. Yep. Share your pain with each other. What else can we do to be bearers of hope?
Not to miss creation's gift.
Yes, go outside, for goodness sake. Right? Susan, keep painting your rocks.
I just had to answer the door because my neighbor, whose family's from Hong Kong, brought me worm castings in addition to this worm soup stuff he brought me the other day so that my tomatoes would be better.
Oh, very nice. Beautiful.
So,
And those aren't just any tomatoes.
yeah.
Those are little teeny tomatoes that have stars on the top.
Wow.
Talk about
Sounds
noticing
amazing.
creation.
Wow.
Sorry, Linda, I couldn't bear it.
Yeah, it's all right. They're black cherry tomatoes, and right at the stem end is a star in red.
Good. Well, I mean, Cormac
wow.
McCarthy does find beauty in nature, that especially that last scene we see with the trout. I do think that for our spiritual welfare, we all have to go outside. Even if you just sit there, you have
Yeah.
to go outside. Look around and remember the beauty of the creation. That's so helpful, particularly because we're so wed to technology right now. Got to do the opposite. Get in the dirt.
Yeah.
Or at least sit by the dirt. Listen to the wind. Watch a bird.
I'm enjoying
Susan, are you painting your rocks?
That was a gift.
Can you unmute, Susan?
Susan, yeah.
I'm sewing masks.
You're sewing masks. Good. That's a great way to be bearers of hope.
And if
Yep.
anybody in this Zoom group needs one, I would mail it to you.
Oh, thank you, honey.
Oh.
That's beautiful. Miss Marie made me a mask. Look at this, talking about being bearers of hope. Hold on a sec. I'm going to put this down. Can you read it?
Oh, great.
Oh, wow.
All right. Hey, good.
That's great.
Well, the prayer flags were another wonderful example of bearing hope. But what else, guys?
I keep thinking about what the Jews must have felt like at the destruction of Jerusalem. And on top of how bad that was, in a fairly short time, it was destroyed another time.
Right.
And I can't imagine how desperate those people must have felt, because I mean, it would be like if suddenly St. John's Cathedral was just destroyed. And
That's a good analogy.
you know, and yet somehow they made their way through it and regrouped. I think that, you know, we've seen times like that, you know, and people have found a way through it, and relied on their own connection with something greater.
Yeah. Yep. I know I think that's one of the things we were so afraid of with the RNC, not the destruction of the cathedral, but the smashing of windows. And
Yeah.
I can't imagine how the Jews must have felt when the temple was destroyed. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good analogy. Remember to breathe, right? Bearers of hope. Are you guys able to move around a little bit too? Lisa, are you walking around or running? Oh, you're muted, sweetie.
I can't run because can't leave the house. I can't leave my dad, but I am swimming now in my pool.
Good.
It's smaller, but yeah, I really missed the running part. One day I will be able to get back to that.
Yeah, yeah.
But just sitting outside to me by the pool and getting my dad outside watering, outside anything is so good. I've got him trained now. He'll even just go sit out there. I make him go feed the cats, our outdoor cats we feed. And just, I feel like any time outside is really, really healing.
Yeah, drag me.
I do have to drag you. He says I have to drag him out there. Sometimes I do have to drag you out there, but not most of the time I don't.
I like to go for a walk with my dog after doing the morning prayers in the morning, and I like to go down by the river, and you see the same characters every day and you wave to them from afar with your mask on, but there's comfort in that, your little neighborhood or your routines. I find hope in our routines. They help, don't they?
They do. I've never really been a routine person, and now I am, which has been a blessing. And
Good.
I walk every morning with my neighbor, and 6 days a week. And we walk across the Little Ortega Bridge and watch the sunrise at 6:30 every morning. It is so beautiful. And you're right, Kate. It is. And the blessing is that you see the same people and you become friends with them almost. It's such an interesting time, and people stop and talk to each other. Young families will with their children. And I told my mother the other day, she's 93, I called her, I said, this reminds me of the 50s, Mom, when people used to really chat with one another and talk over the fence.
Everybody's lonely. They have time now, right?
Yeah. It's those are good things, and sharing that yourself with people like that is, I think, a way we can share God's love.
Yeah, I think waking up in the morning and watching the sunrise as opposed to just being around in the darkness can be really helpful too. Be there when the daylight comes, or at least be in the morning hours where the sun is shining. I think that can be important. Be outside, yeah. Well, keep praying with me about how we can be bearers of the light. This boy carries the light through the book and into the future, really just by his innocence. He's a very loving little boy and doesn't lose that despite all of the things around him. He's very honest and never stops loving. So we could do the same, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, why don't we say a prayer together? The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty God, we give you thanks for the gift of life. We give you thanks for life when it is good, but also we give you thanks for life when it is hard. We give you thanks for the fact that we were born and the fact that we live during this challenging time. Call us deeper into your service, Lord, that we may be bearers of the light. For we are always reminded that the light shines in the darkness and the darkness will not overcome it. Help us to spread that good news to this dark world, especially in this time of loneliness and isolation. Help us to be bearers of that light. We thank you for Cormac McCarthy and the beauty and gift of his writing. Bless each one of us today, Lord, and guide us in all that we do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I'm so glad to be with you guys today. This was fun.
Thanks, Kate.
So much, Kate.
Thank you. I'll hope to see you soon.